Ottawa people, Mr. B again for Yard Media's Jamaica Mix podcast. And today we want to take a look at the business of deportation. And one of the words that most people, Jamaicans especially living in the diaspora, especially if your immigration status not that up to par, ICE. So let me just jump right into it. Now, for Jamaicans in the United States, especially those who have lived here for years, who have built families, paid taxes, and become the financial spine of households back home, being caught and detained is not just a legal event, it is psychological shock, social erasure, and economic severance all at once. The trauma doesn't begin in detention. It begins the moment you realize your life has become removable. Now, at the moment of capture, when your body becomes property of the process, deportation trauma has a recognizable opening scene. There's a knock at the door before sunrise, or an unexpected stop after a traffic matter, or being summoned to what you thought was a routine immigration appointment, or a workplace raid, or a check-in that becomes a handover. Now, from that moment, the person is no longer moving through life as a parent, a worker, a partner, a friend. They are processed, searched, restrained, transported, documented, isolated. Psychologically, this is a hard snap from human identity into administrative identity. And that snap matters. Even people who knew it could happen often describe the capture as unreal, like watching yourself from outside your body. It can trigger panic attacks, dissociation, and acute stress responsive that mimic the early stages of PTSD. The American Psychological Association has documented how immigration enforcement, detention risk, deportation fear, and family separation correlates with anxiety, depression, and chronic stress symptoms. For many Jamaicans, the humiliation carries a special weight. The sudden loss of dignity, the fear of being labeled criminal in public perception, even when the issue is purely civil immigration, and the dread of family finding out through gossip rather than a phone call. And that's the next trauma, the silence. Because once you're detained, communication becomes limited, expensive, monitored, delayed, or just functionally impossible at critical moments. You are present but unreachable, alive but disappearing. Remittances aren't pocket change in Jamaica. They are national infrastructure in human form. And the World Bank estimates that personal remittances are a massive share of the Jamaican economy, most recently put at about 16.2% of GDP in 2024. But that macro number hides the intimate truth that many households' remittances are the differences between school fees paid versus children being sent home, medicine bought versus prescriptions left unfulfilled, rent covered versus eviction, groceries versus hunger, transport fare versus missed work and missed classes. When ICE removes a Jamaican breadwinner from the United States life, the damage travels faster than the person does. The phone credit runs out. The transfers stops. The partner in Jamaica starts stretching food. A teenager drops out quietly. A grandparent's clinic visit becomes when we can. This is why deportation is never a solo punishment. It is a distributed shock across an entire network of dependents, many of whom never set foot in America, never committed any offense, and never even got a hearing. And the cruelest part is the timing. Detention often disrupts remittances immediately before any final deportation flight because income is interrupted, savings are frozen in inaccessible accounts, and employers move on. The detainee's mind runs two tracks at once. Track A, this is about survival logistics. Who will pick up the kids? Where is my passport? How do I call my lawyer if I have one? How do I tell my mother or my family in Jamaica? What happens to my lease, my car note, my job? Track B is the identity collapse. I've been here 10, 15, 20 years. Now I'm a stranger everywhere. Will my family look at me as a failure? Will Jamaica receive me as one of us or as a problem being returned? Will I be safe? This is where trauma becomes existential. Deportation doesn't just remove a person from a country, it breaks their future story, the internal narrative that life is moving towards something stable. When that story shatters, people can spiral into depression, hopelessness, insomnia, intrusive thoughts, and profound shame. And shame is a killer because shame thrives in secrecy. A Jamaican detainee often carries an extra burden, the cultural expectation to make it abroad, to be the one who helps the family climb. When that person is suddenly in detention, in a detention uniform, waiting for a removal flight, they don't only fear being sent home, they fear returning empty-handed, carrying the label deportee. Ask most people what is the worst thing about detention, and you will hear the same word: uncertainty. Not knowing when you'll see a judge, when you'll get a bond, whether you'll be transferred overnight, whether medical care will come, when you'll be deported, whether you'll be separated from friends you just met inside, whether your family can find you if you are moved. A growing body of research points to immigration detention as harmful environment for mental health, especially for those already vulnerable, but so broadly for detainees overall. There are also documented concerns about conditions inside US immigration detention systems, including the use of solitary or restrictive housing at significant scale, practices widely recognized as psychologically damaging. Even without dramatic abuse, detention produces trauma through sleep deprivation, constant surveillance, loss of autonomy, lack of privacy, sudden transfers, social isolation, fear of medical neglect, humiliating procedures that strip personhood. Detention doesn't have to beat you to break you. It only has to keep you in limbo long enough. And so there's a category of Jamaican deportee that Jamaica rarely discusses honestly. the person who left as a child, the person who has no adult life in Jamaica, the person whose accent, habits, and networks are American, the person whose immediate family, spouse, kids are in the US. For them, deportation isn't going back home. It is relocation to a country that feels like a childhood memory, not a living community. They may not have close ties on the island, housing, employment networks, documentation ready, things like TRN, driver's license, or records such as those, cultural fluency for daily survival. Policy thinkers have long described how reintegration requires practical support, ID, documents, temporary housing, referrals, job pathways, and social stabilization. But the psychological reintegration is harder. It demands rebuilding identity under stigma, often with little money and sometimes with real safety concerns, because a returning person may be viewed as a foreign target for extortion or someone who must have money even when they are arriving with nothing. And so this is not a rare drama, it is a recurring pipeline. A Jamaica Gleaner report citing Jamaica Economic and Social Survey noted that 547 Jamaicans were forcibly returned in 2024. 2,843 were forcibly returned between 2020 and 2024. Now, behind every number is a household that has to reconfigure their survival overnight. Here is the uncomfortable truth, and this is what the Jamaica diaspora must stop pretending about. Jamaica benefits from diaspora labor and remittances, but often treats deportation like a side issue, something for the bad people, something to whisper about, something to blame on the individual. That moral framing, in my opinion, is lazy. It blocks solutions. If remittances are the pillar of the economy, and they are, then the state, civil society, and diaspora institutions should treat deportation trauma as a national stability issue, economic, mental health, and social. A practical reform agenda of what supports look like without the spin. For example, in the US community, plus the diaspora organizations, rapid response phone trees to locate detainees and to connect families, a legal support fund with vetted immigration counsel, mental health first aid support for spouses, children left behind, financial continuity planning, authorized access to accounts, child care plans, power of attorney guidance. In Jamaica, the government, the NGOs, and the private sector need to look at a real resourceful reintegration pipelines, IDs, temporary shelter, job placement, skill certification conversion, trauma-informed counseling tied to reintegration service, not optional, not symbolic, micro grants or bridge financing for families whose remittance source is cut off, time-bound and audited, anti-stigma public education. A deportee is not automatically a criminal, and even those with convictions are still human beings who will be living among us. In both countries, stronger transparency and oversight of detention conditions is necessary. Alternatives to detention where possible, especially for long-time residents and parents, and of course, clearer consular engagements so Jamaican nationals aren't disappearing into a system without support. I just want to close this to point out that deportation is not just removal, it is rupture. When ICE carts a Jamaican away, the damage is not confined to a detention facility. It reaches the mother wherever they are in Jamaica, waiting for that Western Union or that remittance money that never arrives. It reaches the child wherever they are again, whose school fees are suddenly pending, the elderly parent whose medication now depends on credit, the spouse in Florida or elsewhere in the United States trying to keep the lights on while calling detention centers for answers, and most significantly, the deportee sitting with the unbearable thought that I built a life and it is now being deleted. This is trauma, not metaphorically, but literal trauma. And until Jamaica and the diaspora, the policymakers, read and treat this as trauma, economic trauma, family trauma, identity trauma, our public conversation will keep blaming individuals while the system keeps breaking families. And so it's important that we understand that when ICE comes, the psychological rupture of Jamaicans is something that we need to pay attention to. There is fear that lives quietly inside many Jamaicans in America. It doesn't shout, it doesn't panic, it just behaves. It wakes up early, goes to work, it sends out money, it keeps receipts, obey traffic laws, avoid trouble, avoid attention, avoid joy that feels too loud, and then one day it materializes. ICE just comes. And in that moment, that Jamaican does not merely lose freedom, they lose continuity. If you like the content, I'm going to ask that you hit the like button. Let me get your feedback on what this is. As I said, we try to do these podcasts to sensitize, to educate Jamaicans. And of course, to make this work, it'll be great if you have not yet done so, that you subscribe to the channel. But more importantly, let me see your feedback in the comment section. And of course, I will do my best to respond to them. But again, this has been the Yard Media's Jamaica Mix podcast and the subject, deportation. Tell me what you think about what we think. Until the next video drop, I'm me, Simon, Mr. B, more time.